Spliced In Later welcomes you back, digital world, once again for another episode. How are you all doing? I hope you're all doing well, that you're alive and not dead, which is good. I'm alive, I'm not dead, I'm excited to be doing more Spliced In Later content. Boy, I love these intros. Maybe one day I'll actually decide what I'm going to say before I start saying it, so I don't sound like a madman. But for now, it adds a bit of spice. Who knows what I'm going to say when we open these episodes? Certainly not me. And I hope at least it is entertaining for the people who continue to tune in and listen to whatever the heck it is I'm going to say. Today, we are headed back to the land of 007. Enough time has passed from our last Bond talk that we can start talking about a specific James Bond, a specific movie from that James Bond, discussing whether it's good, whether it's bad, do I like it, do I not? Because, as again, we'll do our little refresher every time we do one of these episodes, in case you have just decided to pick this one willy-nilly and don't know exactly what is going on here, which is fair. Way back when, in April, right before all the coronavirus stuff was about to kick off, we were supposed to get the new Daniel Craig movie for James Bond, No Time to Die. His fifth James Bond film, and supposedly his last one. Lots of hype, lots of anticipation for it. Cool actors are involved. I'm excited to see Rami Malek as the villain in it. Excited to see Jeffrey Wright back as Felix Leiter. All the usual cast and crew are back. Director looks great. It looks very exciting. But then, of course, it was the first in a series of movies to get delayed due to the ongoing pandemic and was pushed back to November. So, relatively speaking, I wouldn't say every month, but just long enough, I'm taking a look at a particular James Bond actor, a James Bond charactering of that actor, a movie from his bunch of films that they've done, and having a little look into it. And ideally, this will all line up to when No Time to Die is officially released, and I can give you a review of it. The way things are going in the world, in terms of some countries just spiraling out of control, we may not get No Time to Die at the end of this. This whole plan may end up resulting in nothing, just having to wait a little bit longer. We'll have to wait and see. Our fingers are crossed, but honestly, who knows at this point. But for now, it's still fun to go back and have a look at these things, have a little chat, however brief, however long. Let's move on, shall we? Let's get into it. Bit recap, we started off with Pierce Brosnan, because GoldenEye is my favorite James Bond film. So I looked into Pierce Brosnan's Bond, very suave, the man that enticed me to watch all the James Bond films. Relatively speaking, Pierce Brosnan rules. Then moved on to George Lazenby and his one singular appearance in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, wherein I disclosed that if you think he's bad because he was only in one film, it's the exact opposite. George Lazenby could be the definitive Bond, and On Her Majesty's Secret Service is a great film. And then we dived into Timothy Dalton, the man who sort of showed us how Bond could be serious in a way that Daniel Craig is now, specifically in his renegade film License to Kill. I said how much I enjoyed License to Kill, how I liked Timothy Dalton's violent, edgier Bond because I felt he had more character connections than any of the Bonds before him. So far it's been very positive on the Bond front. As we move on now, there's still going to be positivity. I like the James Bond franchise, I like the action, I like the characters, I like the excitement. But we're getting to a point now where the passage of time has started to hurt these movies a bit, I think, to a point where they're not as easy to watch. You can't sit back and watch some of these movies and go, oh yes, classic Bond, this is good, this is how you should behave. So we're going to start today with Sean Connery, the very original James Bond, who started his tenure in 1962. And we're going to look specifically at his film Goldfinger, because if I had to pick my favorite Sean Connery film, it would be Goldfinger. Now, before I get into this, you might see where this is going a bit. I want to say up front immediately, though, that I really like Sean Connery as an actor. And I think for what I've seen of him in interviews, he seems like a nice guy. He might be a bit abrasive, but he's very classy. I love his Scottish accent. He seems to have a good sense of humor. He seems willing to take on a variety of roles. Fun fact, he doesn't act anymore because he was confused by scripts, the way they were developing. He didn't know which movies to pick that would be successful or not. He was offered the role of Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, but he didn't understand the script, so he passed on it. Ian McKellen took it, and of course The Lord of the Rings just exploded. So Sean Connery then picked the next script where he didn't understand what it was about, which was The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which flopped spectacularly. And that was it. Sean Connery said, okay, I'm done, and decided he would retire from acting. And to his credit, he's not that actor that has retired and then come back over and over again. He's retired and he's done. He's not done anything since. So good for him. I love Sean Connery in a lot of movies. I like him in The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I particularly like him in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade as Indy's dad. He's done a couple of Arthur movies. He's done some war movies, The Bridge Too Far. But James Bond is what I would probably consider, and I'm sure most people would agree, is what really kicked off his career as a worldwide movie star. His James Bond was the first. In many ways, most James Bonds are reflecting his performance, trying to imitate him or make it their own. But a lot of the mannerisms, approaches to people, mission, excitement, it all originated with Sean Connery. So at the very least, Sean Connery, great, fantastic man, fantastic actor, very good for starting the James Bond franchise. In terms of the movie Goldfinger, it's my favorite of the Sean Connery bunch because it was the very first one that established the formula, the routine, the recipe for a good James Bond film. The couple before that, I think, struggled to find their footing a bit. I'm in the minority. I think people really like From Russia with Love, which is the movie before this one, more than Goldfinger. Elements of it I think are good, but I think that's still an essence where if you don't know the world of James Bond and you just popped on From Russia with Love, you might be confused, you might not understand what's going on, and there's no real story from start to finish. It does just sort of events happen and you really need to know what's going on to care or follow along. Whereas Goldfinger, if you never watched a single other James Bond movie and you put on Goldfinger, you'd understand what's going on. You'd know what the point is. You'd finish the movie going, I got the story. I don't need to watch any other movies to know what the point of all that was. I got my beginning, I got my middle, and I got my end. To give you a brief recap of Goldfinger, basically James Bond has to stop a megalomaniac called Ulrich Goldfinger, who is obsessed with gold. He loves gold. He wants to have all the gold, essentially, in the world. That's his thing. He's very lucky that his name is Goldfinger. What a coincidence. He's got some sinister plan that Bond needs to figure out, but he's having trouble doing it because whenever he gets a lead, people get killed in spectacular ways involving gold. Goldfinger always seems to be one step ahead of him. He seems to always outsmart him. He has a variety of henchmen with fantastic abilities that Bond just can't seem to stay on top of, namely his minion Oddjob, who flings his hat, which is the most violent hat in the whole world. He's got femme fatales with very on-the-nose names. And his ultimate goal is to break into Fort Knox, essentially, and he wants to irradiate the gold in there. Not steal it, irradiate it, thereby making it worthless so that the only gold in the world that is valuable is his. So in the end, it is up to Bond to figure out how he's going to do this, work with his allies, work with the Americans, with MI6, with whatever women he chooses to romance along the way to stop Goldfinger and save the day. Now, Goldfinger is a very exciting movie. It really hits the ground running. There is a lot going on. There's never a dull moment in the film. And as I said, it really introduces a lot of the tropes which have made the James Bond world such an interesting place to revisit over and over again in different movies. Let's start with Goldfinger, the main villain himself. This is our first megalomaniac. We've had some villains in the past, but they all work for secret organizations and they've got bosses and they've got bosses and so on and so forth. Goldfinger is his own man. He has no official ties to any terrorist organization. He runs his own empire and his plans are completely selfish. It's got nothing to do with world domination or anything like that, but the plan itself is still so outlandish that it could only really exist in a James Bond spy film. Goldfinger is wacky in his approach, the way he uses things. He's always got to have a gold theme to what he does, which can either help or hinder him. And that really plays in later with all the other megalomaniacs that Bond has come across over several other movies, whether it's to use the sun to blow up a country, or use the media with a super secret underwater submarine, or to fire lasers from the moon, or use diamonds to blow stuff up. They've all essentially would not be things that existed if you didn't have Goldfinger first setting the standard. Furthermore, we start to really see the family that Bond essentially kind of sort of has in these movies. It's got a lot better later on, with modern Bond films trying to establish that there is a human being under the spy who cares about the people around him, his boss, M, Gadget Man Q, M's secretary, Miss Moneypenny, and American CIA agent Felix Leiter. So all of these characters are in play here in Goldfinger, and this is the first time they really come together as the characters that they are properly. You establish that M is easily frustrated with Bond, but he knows that he can get the job done. Leiter is basically the American Bond, but just not as good as Bond. They have a friendly rivalry between the two of them. Q absolutely hates how Bond destroys all his gadgets, and it frustrates him no end. And then Bond and Miss Moneypenny flirt, if you can call it 1960s flirting, which is a bit uncomfortable to watch these days. So there you go. You've got Goldfinger establishing the megalomaniac villain, establishing the characters that would essentially go on to be in as many films as Bond himself. And overall, you get the big action climax in Goldfinger 2. There's no secret battles in train stations where no one's paying attention. There are explosions, guns flying, airplanes zooming overhead. Fort Knox becomes a battleground, and Bond has hand-to-hand fights with all these different henchmen before a final confrontation with Goldfinger himself. It also starts to establish that maybe, just maybe, Bond has a conscience and he does care about the people he comes across if they end up on the wrong side of the bad guys that he has to confront. A few tragic characters are collateral damage in Goldfinger, and however briefly, it does sort of seem like he feels bad. Not to a normal extent, not to later Bond films where they've actually gone and done it properly. With Goldfinger, it's very blink and you'll miss it, but it's there. And we start to get female characters that aren't just there for Bond to use and discard, or psychotic villains. You've got interesting females who are agents of companies in other countries. Even our femme fatales, they're tough. They can take on Bond. They've got their own personal stakes in the things that are going on. They are their own characters. Still not to a very good level, but the essence is there, which of course will be built on in later films. Overall, Goldfinger is fun. It is a fun film with good action and an exciting story. It brings in our first ever proper interesting theme to a James Bond film. They had the James Bond theme play for the opening of the first film, Dr. No, and then they had From Russia with Love, which was fine. But Goldfinger is the first real jazzy sort of song that reflects the time of the time period that the movie came out in, so the late 60s. You'll notice if you watch other Bond films, the opening songs start to become very 70s, very 80s, and then today we've got some really banger songs. And they kind of started with this original Goldfinger song. You will notice that I have spent more time with this episode talking more about the movie Goldfinger and the characters itself other than Bond and Sean Connery's portrayal, because as you know in our previous episodes I've said, well, I've opened with why I like Pierce Brosnan's Bond, why I like George Lazenby's, why I like Timothy Dalton. I, unfortunately, do not like Sean Connery's Bond. And that, as I said at the start, is not a reflection on Sean Connery's acting. He's not doing a bad job. It is unfortunately just a fact that times have changed since these original Sean Connery movies came out. The way James Bond is portrayed in these movies essentially is he is nasty, specifically towards women, specifically towards anybody that gets in his way. It's all about the mission and nothing else. People die, he doesn't care. He uses people, doesn't matter what happens to them after he moves on. He just blows through like a hurricane, destroying a lot of lives in the process. And in a reflection of the 60s time as well, he has no qualms with smacking a woman to keep them quiet if he has become annoyed with them, which is, it's hard to watch. I know people can say, oh, it's a classic and you just have to look past that to enjoy the movie itself, but it is such a part of Bond's character. It's not something he does fleetingly and moves on. You watch him on screen and the way he talks to women, and you know that this guy does not really respect them at all, except maybe if he can respect how long it takes for him to seduce them and get what he wants out of them and move on. So in that standard, it's hard to like Sean Connery's Bond and Sean Connery's movies because it's so rampant. And it is in every single one of Sean Connery's films, unfortunately. Dr. No, his first film, interesting. It was good to watch that first one and see how Bond began. But he is horribly nasty to this woman, Sylvia Trench, at the start of the movie. He does go on and save the day from Dr. No and his plan to blow up the world, but several women die in the course of his adventure. We come back to From Russia in Love. That same woman, Sylvia Trench, he slaps at the start of the film and tells her to behave herself and keep quiet while he's on the phone talking to his boss, which is a terrible way for From Russia with Love to start. Completely sours my taste, and I don't really enjoy the rest of the movie after that because I've immediately turned off de Bond's character. As I said with Goldfinger, female characters come off a little better here, but still a lot of them die. Collateral damage just because of their association with him, and he's not that fussed. We move on to Thunderball. There is essentially a female character at the start of this movie who he has to manipulate to get to the bad guy because she is a familiar relation to him. So he has to convince her to help him and not her uncle. And it's only because her uncle is so more terrible that you sort of go, okay, yeah, cool. But Bond's treatment of her and the way he speaks to her, no bueno. Don't like it at all. You move on to You Only Live Twice. Notoriously starts him off with a female interest who gets killed accidentally. A plan to kill him ends up killing her. Within 5 minutes, record 5 minutes, he meets another girl and moves on. And you know this is the girl he's going to have sex with later. Terrible stuff. Then you get On Her Majesty's Secret Service. We move on to George Lazenby. Sean Connery left. We get our movie. We get a James Bond that meets a woman, falls in love with her, treats her as someone he respects, connected to her in such a way that you make it believable. And there's a humanity to Bond that we had not seen before. However, then George Lazenby departed and Sean Connery came back for one more film, Diamonds Are Forever. There's a very brief moment at the start where they sort of tried to tie in that Sean Connery's Bond has the same relationship with the woman from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but it's a pre-credits sequence, and after that, it's never mentioned again, and he's right back to throwing women off a balcony into a pool if they dare to mouth off to him. So it is unfortunate. I understand you have to accept that it is a product of its time, but it's so at the forefront with these Sean Connery films that I don't really enjoy him, which is unfortunate because the movies are about him. Once we moved on to Roger Moore, which we will talk about in our next episode, things took a different turn. I have issues with Roger Moore, but that's a whole other episode, a whole other talk. For now, I just want to sum up because this is more negative than I normally do, but that's also why I've been putting off talking about Sean Connery for so long. It's because I don't have too much to say about him, especially in the positive. I will say they're worth watching, these movies. If you like James Bond films, if you want to go back and watch them all, definitely go back and watch them because they are all relevant to the legacy of Bond. They are all movies that exist. Sean Connery does a great job at starting the character that we now all go and see every 5 or 10 years when a movie comes out. We get to meet all our favorite characters. They're all in here. Great villains. Whole setting set up for future stuff. Could not exist without these movies. But it's hard. You have to be prepared to either be put off by Bond or be able to look around it. And just speaking for me personally, I can't look around it. If I were to recommend the top 5 Bond films to someone to get them into Bond, cautiously, I would not recommend these films. I might recommend Goldfinger just to test the waters, essentially. So there we go. I feel bad. What a negative James Bond episode. That's not what I wanted. So let's sum up on a positive. Sean Connery is a great actor and he seems like a great man. Without him, James Bond wouldn't exist. So thanks, Sean Connery. Thank you for all the other acting stuff you did in future that I really love. I would very much recommend Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade if you want to watch a really good Sean Connery movie. I'm sorry that you're retired. I wish you had... Well, no, I don't wish you'd done Lord of the Rings because I love Ian McKellen. I wish League of Extraordinary Gentlemen hadn't turned out as a disappointment at the box office, and for critics, as it turned out being, because you might still be acting now. Who knows what you'd be doing. Thank you all for listening, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed. If you are curious, definitely check out Goldfinger if you haven't seen these movies and want to see what I'm talking about, and form your own opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. If I'm too hard on Sean Connery, feel free to let me know. If you agree with me, feel free to let me know. If you just don't care, that's fine. As long as you don't act like Bond in the movies, you can watch him. It's very important to know that his behavior is just not acceptable. Not at all. In many ways, maybe the villains are the better characters. Maybe it's certainly better to irradiate gold than to lay hands on a person and telling them to behave when they're just being a person. Interesting concept. Certainly something that probably deserves a deeper discussion in a more civilized place than Spliced In Later's podcast. But thank you. Thank you for listening. I will be back next week to bring you a top 10. I've been working on this top 10 since last week. The top 10 keeps changing. I can't really settle on my top 10, so it's going to be interesting to see what I come up with at the end. But I hope you'll join me. And for all my Bond fans, I hope I haven't alienated you. I hope you can see my point of view, and if you feel free, like giving me your point of view, I will of course listen. We will be back in the future for another James Bond chat with our fingers crossed that No Time to Die will in fact come out. But until then, I love and appreciate you as always. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.